The one you see was sent like 5 minutes ago. Yes. Karen? Yeah. You all didn't?
Yeah.
Advantage 1 is BOS for aviation triggers fast warming CT, kickstarts sustainable aviation development layout 24 program, development aviation releases safety carbon balloons, high altitude 70 medium impact, other industry aviation bridges 2050 tenfold increase substation limiting 2 degrees centigrade past other advanced attack, reach bottleneck route optimization, low insufficient protect capacity, safe flow, lowest cost double, carbon pricing influences operational cost impacts, commercial decision to focus, significant portion airlines expenses, improve optimization, increase cost efficiency, differences purchasing cost about airlines to adjust networks, optimizing strategic necessity for airline, market demand, augmenting profitability, low cost carriers capitalize, preference for shorter drop times enable gain competitive advantage over large airlines. Green aviation is key to avert tipping points. Led 20 aviation, hard global activity, enhanced connectivity, linked to so many sectors, number of passengers reach 8.2 billion, growth rate overshadowed 2 degrees. So percentage cannot be overlooked, should be seen with reference to growth rate aviation is different. Chemical prices adding to warming scenarios, suits like carbon nanotube, sun, CO, carbon impact, atmospheric composition, nutrient dose, certification, made of emission from aviation, other transport modes have fallen oxygen bubbles and layers, supersonic aircraft, related to stars, windows, and depletion aviation 10 kilometer emit 56 gigatons CO2 each. Climate scenario causes extinction. 1. Climate change spread. 24. Economic advantage renewable become obvious. However, emission declines slow. Sea loss. Nice. Loss in decreasing Earth's reflectivity carbon source. Coordinated model projection 380. IPCC scientists forcing same dystopian future tipping points reach sooner. Then science suggests global temperature more sensitive than models estimate this existential that risk are non-linear. Casting universal weather fiction undercut by long-term warning, holding rapid near-term reduction, reduce risk impact, water resources, food production, energy, people, health, international trade, international security, central permanently alter the way the planet works, barriers, no circulation, colors, cascade, as hot and also increasing speed, disease, catastrophic events, includes nuclear war, pandemics, disruptive technologies, fat tail, risk probably higher than normal, focus on likely outcomes, rate of false sense of security. 2. Ozone depletion, given 21 mass extinction involved catastrophic depletion of ozone, deadly UV radiation reaching Earth's surface speed, their last extinction event 100 times slower than today's radiation damage at the DNA level, ozone loss, change, free radical chemistry, continued addition of methane, increased ultraviolet dosage. 3. Ocean acidification, crib, 22 human action setting, planet back to primary ocean, very little besides animals, organism can survive, oxygen breaks top of water, no longer means with deeper, water becomes stagnant, all natural water, leaving only red, green, yellow, into what's got falling out, as acid rate, changeable, oxygen, climate, food, meth, extinction dive solves 1. Economic incentives, ensures modeling change, 17. Inputs, ACT countries pay more attention, environmental problems, damage, national reputation, post retaliation, become NPM schema, signed bilateral agreements, related, mutual benefits, MBA preferable choice, better for economies, game models based on national equilibrium, ACT, post efficiency. 2. Emissions, they're overwhelmingly concentrated in the U.S. Overton, 20 growth, of air travel, freight, and aviation market, highest growth of emissions, U.S. largest air traffic system, account for 23% of CO2 emitted total in commercial aviation, been in country rank total number 6 in the world series class, infrared rates, reducing effectiveness 3 times the impact of CO2 includes all CO2 where regarding fully understood the impact of sustainable boundaries considered to be low inside life cycle GHG reduces universal reduction contrast 3 TAM adjust the rates based on emission levels Hobson 20 inclusion TAM reduce emission rate increase probability achieving emission target adjusting rate times not switch back to the side path adjust their downward emissions lower to lowest cost serve as an insurance policy against high emission carbon tax without uncertainty about the common growth 10 progress also through prices and emissions 4 ICAO unilateral action forces and multilateral concert matter 22 pricing consider with aviation law bilateral agreement states more like the negotiate EU or implement service agreement allow duties for foreign airlines unilateral mechanism when not fall within the scope of provision and article 15 ICAO right all this of car pricing need to avoid passport conversion OBMs China observe assemblies no right to prohibit states unilateral measures offer competitive advantage for multi-line ICAO limited capacity nation local mitigation action not done as a core innovation only after US EPA the international fuel efficiency and council of the DOD first such monthly commissions implementing car pricing mechanism cooperation with other parties including global leadership and other leverage so they don't option fits close to the ICAO not effective strategy formulated world will have a long-term strategy without Corsia fails and ruins ICAO leadership now by 22 ICAO continue to ignore the CO2 impacts of aviation fuel inefficiency without resulting in reduction in fuel burn GHG emissions Corsia limitation not lead to deep decarbonization ignoring non-CO2 impacts does not limit international emissions a major player not indicated intention to participate in pilot phases evidence and likely to induce technological innovation and financing often increase reverse the difference to referring communities ICAO failed to exercise leadership car pricing instruments and extended Berkeley aviation US do not include aviation emissions within the mechanism EU ETS impose an increase in flight prices by only 0.9% failure to resolve aviation emissions spills over Operator 14 ICAO critical strategy critical advance critical to the aircraft with that program of leadership and governance from Georgia to spell accusation regarding ineptitude ICAO dealing with airplanes for 16 years public climate action failure to deliver costing industry billions of reckless the incidents and lack of awareness leadership so the relevancy and credibility of the organization tax generates revenue for emissions emissions revenue generated in accordance with ICAO back in the air transport. ICAO legitimacy is key to low orbital space management. ICAO 19 ICAO political side of the take on space traffic management and United Nature will need to be passed ICAO structure to have been elected council 36 members unanimous basis source ICAO suborbital flights actual tension space flights will fly through airspace every slow orbital commercial flights will come watch check out convention include examine commercial and check aspects of suborbital flights mandatory audit of safety and security and address a report of sufficient damage in no country was about report each country regard to provide air navigation service and to do your removal once given ICAO will give results in collaboration with the space industry. That's key to space debris navigation. McCormick 23 space management that can do cloud space and your maneuver of active space objects and systems among scientists without robust SCM collision and degree could lead to loss of entire orbital stress. The castle system of active satellites and debris. So the roads working for maneuvers to be executed. Maneuver requires coordination, communication, data, and information exchange and divine governance process. Communication collapse unlocks every existential risk. Marathon to the communication satellites building. Garbage networks and others for plane important. Well, agricultural fisheries, transportation, predicting weather condition, monitoring phenomena, something using military to monitor activity satellites to identify threats to Earth, messaging, connect for data, power device, and drug mobility without resources leading to billions of death. 30% of those online and direct consequences of society independent sugar and without support struggle to collaborate with the allies, shortfalls, government services leading increased crime, can be catastrophic community intervention, biodiversity disruption, plant species, land, artificial purpose, space, rapid extinction, removal, and search population and species, cause cascading effects, lead to change the ecosystem, independently satellite collapse, causes nuclear war, pressure, 14 space shot, gives on nuclear war threats to space assets, growing efforts, limit dominance, escalating, destroying mechanisms, satellites, the US war was coming, think China, trying to take out ability to attack nuclear countries, develop a satellite, trying North Korea, Iran, survival control system by blowing satellites and low orbital, or create debris, US could mistake this to strike against sophisticated capabilities, plan the United States federal government should adopt carbon penalty on the aviation sector, utilizing a price adjustment mechanism based on emissions level. Advanced issue is SEFs. Carbon pricing is key to stimulate demand, but subsidies fail. Currently 24 rates and cost data SEF model uncertainty adoption differ among airlines and limiting negative emission. Now, let me charge emissions fees directly help many effective fuel costs. Air travel driven by styre failing into price and dominated by frequent travel to high penalties. It says demand is weak. Grid challenge inflation reduction act or incentive and tax investors to set up refineries to special investment given higher expenses essential to establish suitable carbon pricing to enhance SEF's appeal. Ethanol is the lifeblood of the industry, but inevitable EV transition destroys it. Ethanol 24 ethanol consuming 30% corn. 500 billion bushels majority rural regions 24 2,000 jobs. EVs gain larger market share, decrease demand. SEF the industry increased demand also declining from other industry rapid decarbonization by 2050 due to tech advancement, decreased gasoline consumption, accumulated loss value, 178 billion for the ag industry. Increased SEFs encourages sustainable farming practices and prevents collapse. Risen 21 to 1.5 billion. Revenue strong profits, potential converting byproducts and biofuels, waste funds with gasoline and reduced costs. Emphasis combined with the fuel efficiency, lowest cost of gas, lean for consumers, bolting core prices, benefiting farmers, production, helps to make bioethanol and casting to prevent that global market, reducing price volatility, greater financial flexibility, make long-term investments in climate, smart farm practices, taxation is key to make them sustainable. 24 carbon taxation makes biofuel consumption sustainable. Model analyze correlation between pricing and consumption, security correlation in short and long-term emission to 3.7% per each unit of taxation industries that depend on natural resources and radical change of policies, bringing this into line and green and perfect green group with restored potential, where we're creating an ecosystem, providing innovation and techniques that reduce emission multiplication to use domestic food shops spill over. Puma 17 US superpower when it comes to food, so many shifts in policy connect consumers of food is sensitive to small changes in matters of the US supply could produce effects that have receptors rapidly major shopping points are predictable. Food insecurity causes nuclear war, crib 22 food scarcity are primary drives in 2/3 amount of conflict primary aim in World War II in Ukraine, hunger struggles and failure, civil wars and refugees, tsunami that reach high risk of food fears and conflict accomplishing government failures, new war link to food and war is inexorable. SAFs are crucial for air dominance of 22 new fuel increase performance critical speed and climate rates for entities to prevail in conflict duty. The need for market dynamics also trains significant massive defense budget feedstock standards to these services construct fuel refineries usually red air no change electricity requirements of fuel structures which translate to tactical advantage more energy than fuel increasing aircraft payload and range sustainable fuels not counts competitive take significant investment unclear demand will justify the investment that unleashes the military one fuel attack Seraphim 22 energy efficient technique cars emerging the rights reliance on the traditional energy creates vulnerabilities but resupplying forces military must be unleashed on the other fuel vulnerable to energy have special adversaries who perfect conflict force prediction to be considered risk of lethality improve reduce energy fuel burn 2 forward basing big Williams empty massive instability of petroleum air force is lead the way Navy participating in testing aviation biofuel towards a specific area fuel based on available fuel direct impact on flexibility of air routes despite adoption of jet fuel online economics is a factor of aviation biofuel more costly air force certified all aircraft using GPA to combat biofuel but instead of to change each pressure cycle global agility required for air force to rapidly seize the opportunity to turn and ensure allies aircraft must be able to fly whatever fuel is available. Air superiority soft extinction Berkeley 24 America is inevitably question to prepare challenges China Pacific Russia Ukraine Iran pursuing nukes North Korea threatening nukes and SAS the established regions air force foundational elements of security air superiority is an essential condition for any operation ability to fight depend on operation ability to strike deterrence and disable TNT and temperature first to prevent nuke attack deter advantage to storm Ukraine if the threats on the rise modern day risk security Army Navy develop missile spies at a fraction of the cost China Russia poses risk to discussion only must ensure air superiority certainty is key for every advantage block 24 policy turning political signals they take out shock with the conversation plans lasting assets purchases consider policy impact less confidence make investors discount prices resulting less investment certainty important for aviation zero emission fuel impact resulting in slow decline in production costs and regenerative ag and life cycle emissions Anderson 24 benefit realized by regenerative ag improves soil health farm sustainability cascading efficiency actually reduce emissions waste reduce life cycle emissions of ATF to SAF can be offset by soil cost sequestration increased by improving soil health and infusing equipment fertilizer to reduce NTO genetic studies are outdated.
5 seconds.
Next video, update, track 23. Students who do impossible centuries such a hybrid environment as much as centuries from a decade ago, refining to use wood natural gas instead of coal plants have better efficiency.
You good?
He's sending out 2 cards, but I can start before if you want.
Okay, sweet. What is a carbon penalty?
A carbon penalty is like a penalty for each use of each carbon.
So it's just a carbon tax.
It's a penalty. Not
What's the difference?
Well, a tax probably has to be done by a different agency than what a penalty can be done, but
Okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense. What constitutes like the aviation sector?
like commercial planes.
Just commercial planes?
But what are you trying to limit out in that question?
I am asking you what the words in your plan text mean.
Emilio, commercial.
Yes, commercial, yeah.
Just commercial flights? Okay.
Commercial and private flights as well.
And private flights, okay.
Just like anything that
is
falls under
yeah, I
FAA
have another question.
jurisdiction.
Is aviation the root cause of emissions?
Yes.
Why?
Well, our evidence is fantastic on this.
How does aviation cause ag emissions, production emissions,
Wait, it doesn't have to be the root cause of all emissions.
My question
Our
for you
evidence is it's the only barrier
you
to
have set
decarbonization.
your green aviation, like bright line to stop warming, as stopping CO2, CO, NOx, and SO2. That's your
Yep.
card that you read.
Well, the
How do you stop all of those emissions?
Well, the
Not
Langley and
only
Yao
from
evidence
there?
says that aviation is specifically key for a couple of reasons. The first one is that it's the only type of emissions that happen that high, so they mess with clouds, which ruins all of the positive
Do you think
feedback.
that clouds stop CO2 from going up?
No, but we do
Well,
think
what?
that the radiative forcing of aviation emissions is exponential because it
There
has
is
a
no hard
wonder-
barrier. The troposphere is not a hard barrier for gases. They can continue past it. This is a non-starter. I want to ask
Wait,
about
I mean-
ICAO. What is it?
ICAO is an international forum to deal with aviation.
Why does them having leadership stop things that are bad?
What do you mean? Why did it stop things like?
Well, you seem to say that they're limited.
Well, the McCormick evidence says that spacefaring nations rely on safe and secure maneuvers. It says the only way to do that cooperation between nations is through multilateral forums, which is the only way we can communicate with other countries over what debris is happening in space. No one else
Your
trusts
argument
any
is
other
that
forum other than ICAO to do that.
ICAO
And ICAO can easily spill over because the
your
Chicago
argument is
Convention.
that ICAO is the only way to talk to other countries about space debris.
Yeah, our evidence says it's the only possible way to solve it, yes. It's the only international forum that exists to do over aviation.
What causes food shocks in the status quo?
What do you mean?
collapse
Like,
of the ethanol industry.
collapse of the ethanol industry collapses the ag sector in the US, which causes cascading.
Why is like how?
Because there's
Because-
an inevitable transition to EVs, which is going to leave all these ethanol refineries stranded.
Yeah.
That's why we need to.
It's about the inevitable transition to
What?
renew-
Yeah.
away from.
I'm asking you
fossil
why that
fuels.
collapses ag.
Well, because the Adamson evidence says that the rural region depends on ethanol being sold because it's the only way that farmers can turn a profit by using the excess,
Sure.
like the excess things like corn
Okay.
husk to sell.
I want to ask about the certainty card. The bottom seems to say like the impact is slower declines in production costs. Why
Yeah.
is that bad?
Because every degree matters for warming. It also wouldn't solve the
Oh.
food shock scenario because our argument is it's on the brink now, and then it wouldn't solve the Air Force scenario either because the uptake is too slow.
The fuel tax scenario, how do you get to this internal link if you're only taxed the aviation sector? And also you said the
Because the
commercial
only
aviation
internal link
sector.
is cost efficiency. Our evidence says that planes can use SAFs now, the other ones just can't afford them.
Sorry, I made a conflicted copy. I just want to make sure the one I sent out is the correct one.
Classic.
I know, right? Okay, yes, it is. That is not the right button. It's sent. I can ignore it when I send it. It's gonna be 7 in case order advantage 1, advantage 2. Is anyone not ready? Take it. Cool. I'm gonna start that. First off, on the critique, invocation of death impacts are necrophilia, no obsession with body count that ends in extinction, vote negative, reject, and react 21. Necrophilia obsession, that is a dead passion to destroy exclusive interest in mechanical backfields and distraction of life, enjoy necrophilia is pathological, connected to the cause of world war, or pure destruction by bureaucratic administrative people, the things that orientation makes a life soulless, having is a six into more relationship, it's or possessing a necrophilia, find violence, regard dark and more, and then like making them turn their life into things, everything dead, governed like a robot, and even if they're right, next off. The 50 states of the United States should enter an interstate compact to adopt a carbon penalty on the aviation sector utilizing a price adjustment mechanism based on emission levels. And that solves Craig 10. A compact for multi-state energy program is a good shield of the program for preemption and states to consider the need for a compact advantage operating one. Next off. Federalism is high now. Council 23 predictions for 2024 go to the state capital. States are squeezing in. The Fed preoccupied with symbolic fight action on the state capital. Future the EVs hangs on the states that depends on how fast the states spend. A nation changing network hits the movement that can't be stopped. And the plan crushes it. Algebra 20. Good reason to question a federal approach to environmental problems. Federal state balancing environmental law. The Fed is overly centralized. Crowds out of state government. Local priority gets assumed by federal regulation. Edicts result in protective judicial match with dramatic policy goals. Federal decisions were final to accountable. The local particulars likely to be overcome so predictive in some areas and underpredictive in others. One size fits all. Federal policies operate as no size fits nobody, and they get modeled globally. Brooks 116 federalization in the United States repercussions over their state building process, shape deliberation, Constitution Assembly, South America, Mexico, gleaned from the United States experience, and collapse causes global war. Like in 09, cross-national studies have shown federalism minimizes violent conflicts, stifles the development of rebellions, moderates politics by expanding the opportunity for victory. Federalism reduce the level of ethnic violence groups at the local level, and can influence many of the issues that matter to the broader empirical studies support the claim that power sharing and compulsory peaceful accommodation to prevent violent conflict and builds long-term support for peaceful solutions undermine the appeal to militant action. Next off. Interpretation, decarbonization requires reducing GHGs via zero carbon energy and economy-wide application. Show 22. There are two aspects of decarbonization. First, until GHGs through the use of zero carbon energy to achieve decarbonization, all aspects of the economy must change. Industry, transport, buildings, ag, and the land use sectors must be transformed. The violation, they only apply to the aviation sector and voted for limits and ground. Their model incentivizes a race to the margin over the smallest possible single industry after that evaporates the coordinate links and kills fairness and clash. Next off. The United States federal government should substantially increase its funding and implementation of nuclear fusion and solar-forming energy and security. Da Vinci 24. Determined to combat climate change, meet energy demand and security. The future fusion emerges as often unparalleled advantages to reduce emissions and harness it. Immense power resulting in abundant and sustainable energy source that is not abundant and significantly reduce our carbon and phosphorus cleaner and future fusion self-limited, making it inherently safe. Next off. Prices are high enough to backstop Vision 2030. Key to starting diversification. Also, one vision is accelerated current investment when representing a push towards diversification, infrastructure, government industry policy, focus on renewable energy, biotech, AI, and manufacturing ability to harness revenues for public investment associated with 75. The vision of foreign income is necessary to pay immunity goods, capital, machinery, and services, as well as an exclusive source of earnings, diversifying as well as enable Saudi to prepare for a post-oil future to stability and resilience of persistent risks of the contraction to climate. 2024 oil prices allowed expeditionary fiscal pass the momentum will be tested as a decline in oil revenues, and the plan is a death knell for oil exporters like Saudi Arabia. IATA 24, the challenge of the airline industry is SAF, and the airlines cannot use wind or solar or wind energy. Airlines will only need liquid fuel that will switch from fossil fuel to SFA, and involves a staggering a price increase. Airlines are an integral part of the whole that importantly sells air transportation, and challenges will go a long way in solving these of the broader economy. Lower oil prices negatively impact oil exporting countries. Lower oil prices harm the oil sector. Saudi Arabia representing 40% of the nation's GDP, and Saudi is heavily dependent on oil revenues, and no transition, only low oil prices, forced regime, classic triggers a Middle East power vacuum. Article 22. The Saudi is heavily dependent on revenue from oil. Around 85% of budget GDP is largely from oil. Vision 2030. I can't do it completely. We know that to some extent oil is a very important to Saudi. Even the private sector remain dependent. The idea that we divorce from global markets. The Saudis is misinformed. The idea that the whole plan is going to transition. The Saudis don't believe that they're increasing production, cheapest energy from hydrocarbons. Even the IAEA doesn't think that demand is going to go down in the next decade. The Saudi become unstable and collapse and down. Replace the democratic regime cannot be replaced. People take over to exactly Afghanistan or Iran. Bad news for the West, very bad for Israel. We should be worse than it. It goes nuclear to Vienna, rapid miscalculation this year in several pathways and no checks. Act 24. The Middle East is complex, dynamic, and volatile with a far-reaching implication of protest by nuclear shadows of Russia, Pakistan, China, and no code and essays of this deal and nukes in the states under crisis underpinned by terrain. And this situation is ripe for war. The tipping point is Iranian decision across the threshold to dismantle U.S.-led order. The window opportunity October 2025 version for the number of reforms tipping point in the cascade of proliferation, nuclear latency, competition for an advantage, the worst case, failure to deterrence, miscalculation, eruption of war involving Iran and Russia, NATO, China, Taiwan wars would be the nuclear Iran, but you said use it to study the course of Pacific crisis. The fate of non-prolif is a hostage of the Middle East. Next off. The United States federal government ought to commission a rapid and binding health impact assessment of the National Environmental Policy Act to evaluate whether the United States federal government ought to adopt a carbon penalty on the aviation sector utilizing a price adjustment mechanism based on emission levels. The United States federal government ought to implement the recommendations in HIA Salt Q 20. HIA recommendations allow with preferred course of action to get the petition comparatively easy to achieve the decision makers down implement HIA generate discussion to spread out like policymaker action in support of raising awareness of the wide range of the conditions that shape that health and draft disparities and expansion is key to prevent diseases. US said 12 emergencies. HIAs of 3/4 emerging diseases originating from wildlife and advanced department's activities included deforestation, development of facilities, expansion of local communities, agriculture, migration, and amplify the risk of pathogen spillover, impact assessments with strength origin, HIA, and the screening determines activities, understanding diseases with zoonotic potential, and extinction law set all 20. COVID non-anticipated trigger nexus civilization made it easier to efficacy to outbreaks is accelerated by 2050. 2/3 of the world live in urban areas. Novel outbreaks ability fertile ground hyperconnected to warming, spread waterborne diseases, lost central buffers, 15 community ecosystem, trait to spread its virality, and biotech kind of hash feed, maybe release at risk on existential scale. Case advantage 1. First, on warming, intervening actors checks no reason they let themselves die, and increase some third order magnitude larger than the worst case model source at 23. Earth has been much hotter during the PETM, but extinctions were limited. Seem rapid warming before 10 degrees. 10 warming occurred over 20 years. The mammals surviving temperatures compared to the worst case scenarios did achieve greater numbers of attack and before warning can survive. And warming gradual non-existential best models may encroach 24 to come models that remember hot relative observation was cited as astronomical figure to propose an IPCC the alternative explanation as sharp cooling for ozone depletion and aerosols as stats that fingerprint flawed. Models overestimated warming in the sphere, significant amount of geographic patterns not valid. Globally overestimated surface and ocean temperature remain models all examples of higher humidity, ice loss, and temperature change. The natural causes not exceed the variability. Common prediction suggests natural forces drive cyclical changes in the sun causing more major collision in AMO that have been around since 1567 AD. The cost and death rapidly declining dangerous should not have changed the situation. Unable to attribute to human causes death declining 99% lack analysis damage credibility. And ozone hole NASA 2024 holding ozone layer to the relatively small in 2024 compared to the years NASA scientists and NASA and NOAA project that the ozone layer will be fully recovered by 2066. And the important improvement is due to the combination of continued declines in harmful chlorophyll CFG chemicals with along with unexpected influence of ozone carried by air currents. And ICAO fails to show for an impact on 21. Failure of China is leaving the place in shambles. The organization existed to ensure aviation safety, security, organization, but post-trial failure to suffering international management duties as well as breakdown performing assigned a role in global aviation. No internal link is the safety organization, not a conflict-stopping organization with enforcement mechanisms. And on Space 3's time frame, it's far off. It's too far off. Their cards talk about spacefaring nations, which isn't going to happen before warming anyways. And no internal link to Space 3. Card just says that ICAO does overstate now the reason that the planet is credibility and SAFA spills over and no debris cascades. Even a worst case, you can find a low LEO with no impact phase 17. A custom is overhead. High to course, the thermometers are wrong into the low LEO with things that burn out quickly. High LEO where jump orbited GPS and now it's stats under here. Volume is so huge, numbers are so few that you don't have to worry about here. The GEOs stats have been moving in speed, and then also the only 1 per 1,000 km. It's not a problem. Imagine worst case of the odds of hitting our tiny less than 1 in 10,000. We don't lose access in real life. There's a lot of factors make us less of our problem. Cut that card at problem. Moving on to the next advantage. U.S. farm emissions are dropping the bucket and already declining. Other GHG stuff from 19. Globally accounted for impact and overstated by the U.S. at about 14.5% of emissions that are vastly different and false model than 3.9. Our farmers are more efficient. Emissions are much lower than Brazil, China, and India. The EU emissions of methane doesn't hang around as a short-lived gun. Advances in America, many of the U.S. combating less methane. On the other hand, fossil fuels results in negative CO2 and accounted for 82% of indigenous transportation, electricity contributed 80%, and global food supply strong plus 15 yields and global production increase in recent decades. Available supplies increased 44%. Hunger declined by 73 billion. Population increase that occurred despite diversification lanes from biofusion. No impact cross applied the warming defense and no readiness to impact affects 18 in South America and the U.S. has misuse of responsibility. U.S. maintains no presence in Africa. The Europe has been unaffected. 95,000 troops and none of task with stability. The continent is most stable. Russia and China troops would not alter conquest of territories unrelated to wealth. Russia not benefit from Ukraine and China is ruled in Taiwan. Let's go to Taiwan. I'm good for cross.
Status of off.
Conditional.
The death K, what's the link?
We think that you fetishize death impacts.
Is there impact to like in-round subjectivity formation?
Yeah.
Okay, it seems like you knew that death impacts were bad and you still read death impacts. Why is that not far worse?
Yeah.
This is an even F question.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like that's premeditated murder.
Well, I mean, we're negative, so I guess that doesn't really matter.
I mean, we'll have a debate about that.
If you want to talk about like
the
premeditated
state's
murder,
counterplan,
that
wait,
is the epistemology.
Status of off.
We are saying conditional.
Oh, okay. The federalism dissad.
Sure.
What is the link?
Sure. We think Adler 20 specifies that it crowds out states' governments. It forces them to not only enforce the plan in some instances, but federal policy decisions also override state decisions.
What state decisions would the plan override?
Sure, we think climate policies.
Which climate policies?
I mean, we don't have particular ones about the airline industry listed in the 1AC or Adler. We do think there's a federal state balance in environmental law that obviously the plan disrupts because it's a massive change from.
Wait, aviation is like literally only governed by the federal government. There's zero things that states do. It was exempted from California's LCFS because of that. Wait, what is the link here? States have already said
Want an answer?
the Fed does not apply.
Sure, we still think that states, one, have some level of oversight over airlines.
Like
Two,
what?
we think, well, I'm about to get to that. That we think they have oversight over those businesses. They get tax revenue from them. We think that the plan causes a massive decrease in revenue from.
This says contemporary environmental problems, quote, particularly those administered by the EPA. The is not by the EPA. What line in here even comes close to finding a link?
Sure. It's just the first line. I've said multiple times. There's a federal state balance in environmental law. If you change environmental law, if you change environmental law, i.e. you shift it more towards the federal government than it already is, this creates a disbalance between the state and the Fed.
Okay.
That is the link we've outlined for the DA. You've asked.
Okay, sure. The HIA's counterplan, Trump just said NEPA does not work anymore. Why is there spillover between singular instances?
Sure, we think there's actually uniqueness for the internal net benefit, i.e. we can prove that through the use of the health impact assessment that it is still viable in the Trump administration. We think that policymakers.
What part is in the context of the Trump administration?
I mean, you've made an argument about Trump. We will make an argument about Trump.
Okay, so what's the spillover warrant between singular instances? Like what incentive does Trump have to follow these?
That's sure. We haven't made an argument about Trump. I'm saying if you made one of the 2AC, that would be the 2NC explanation. Q20 does talk about spillover. It says alignment with HIA recommendations ensures that
it's in the
other.
context of violence. Okay, the fusion counterplan, what's the net benefit?
The oil dissat.
Sure.
Wait, what? How is it a net benefit to the oil dissat? Would it not also displace oil?
No.
Why not?
Well, the fusion counterplan is in the United States. We won't make modeling arguments.
Okay, so the only link to the oil dissat is modeling.
But that's one of them.
How do you solve warming if you don't model?
What?
How do you solve warming if you
Well,
don't model?
we think in the 1AC you have said that the U.S. is the highest emitter, and if you solve for U.S. emissions,
You said the highest emitter for airline emissions, which is the counterplan.
I'm pretty sure I set that up in cross-ex.
Right? You should read the exhibit from LCS. I can pull it.
Was 40 seconds. Actually, no, we're gonna take a little bit. Start right. Sit. Order is 1, 2, subsets. States. The fusion counterplan. HIA counterplan, the federalism DA, the Saudi DA, and then the death cap. Oh, you know we're good. Good?
Yeah.
Cool.
Climate, yes, I see your best science tipping points, talking feedback, lose causes nuclear war disease, take collapse and famine, models underestimate the tail and risk us right no intervention has gotten this far, and also if they make an adaptation worse, Pratt said the sense of climate happens too fast, Thor that's wrong, Earth gradually got hotter, our impacts are fast warming bad, it's not gradual aviation, causes fast warming, unique impacts on the atmosphere because of altitude and chemicals, that's Leo and other sectors to decarbonize ozone, cause extinction, airplanes, release depleting chemicals, electric EV race, briefly cause life on Earth, this gives us NASA has the context of the CFC, the app is a massive all-cause ocean acidification, cause extinction drop, only single cell organisms survive and Berkeley kills all life on Earth. That's crib. ICAL uniqueness for the app, but they drop. Warming is the most important internal link for credibility. It's not a safety organ. Does space travel management comms a collapse cause extinction. This barrel pod. All modern life relies on it. Modern info medical system, research management, military, and third preemption independently causes civil wars. Cause extinction. Those drop. This rapid time frame soon. Debris are increased because of rocket launches. Yes, internal drop. ICAL remove debris and manage spaceships through trash piles. Yes, cascade drop. Scientific consensus and new launches. Increased risk. Satellite war. Did that above advantage to food wars. Cause extinction. U.S. and for global exports. Collapse of Berkeley. Cause conflict. Collapse government goes nuclear. This create farming emissions doesn't matter. Drop aviation's key. Global food supply decline inevitable because no evidence has ethanol industry collapse. Good transition. EVs air power cause air power decline cause extinction. It's key for rapid victory. Deterrent food. Moderate undermines credibility. Ignites every house about this Berkeley T subsets with mean textually alternative supply text and a vacuum arbitrary decarbonization is a process chemistry that the process of somebody who's government government release and result of a process. It means within this P20 on purpose and limits a term within a place of also relation of person close with other limits is room 4 means at the end of the furthest page and 13 is we go further further forward to find out. As for A precedes discrete countable things, it means multiple substances must be topical score term. And 21, A precedes countable nouns and decision use 8 supposed to have a term the discrete countable thing shows the disaster. It allows ag and land use. Well, insert a re-highlighting that violates EP. This Akaki 22 energy possible likes of production decision with energy unit covers area not directly into social limited technical diversity global economy must decarbonize which zero asks mean and intended to find its question and solve out what the policy for decarbonization is. Decarbonization means let's cover this. Akaki 24 decarbonization wants to restore G5 cost makes predictable coverage changes involve the production quantities of coverage release of sold production offsetting convert flex for utilities only cost for not restricted limits one side innovation kills fairness B functional limits does next top in decades got the states kind of politics renewables bad risk kind of C picks no limit zero solvency deficit terms negative win rate C reason body office defeats bad incentivize cheap traffic are kind of substantive debates the states kind of 50 safety gas better not remote no solvency deficit non-uniform fields of permutation to grove shields and permutation do the counter plan and combat clause requires federal approval is brilliant 91 days ago the interstate company for a lot of congressional approval doesn't solve 80 this that's for sure 24 there everything about 80 years so we were to see some regulations that have ever long with the air carrier of course 80 is one of the state was a connector but a line with the green there's no with it and then there's no which of course one of the 80 company state laws only indirect FAA this will get 20 given exclusive with every airspace forward is that twice a single authority rules whatever airspace will only spend FAA responsibility outside of aviation overseas and proper program Trump this right out 21 increase support for judiciary preemption this placing state local effort suspension is still preemption first customer use legislative regulators and person interstate federal trust we power rights usually do appropriate standard setting partner federal relationship with language and explicitly parent state local rules persuaded according to laws we have lifted entirely obstacle to goals of the federal government modeling this first of all 16 court of the state and president was created disparate evade of state action complicates international negotiation by the part of the negotiations and fusion countermone conditionality one again one sees achieve strategy to cover over substance that creates bad applicants citizen suggestion to do so solves no neck if an opportunity costs possible for so in case debates better voter for discharge permutation do any combo of the place and do the counter plan taxation key climate change airlines internalize emission forces transition and maintain market competitiveness and his model this Leo and saying SAF taxation increases market competitiveness forces widespread airline adoption this Cargani and Leo ICAL courses unsustainable rally bringing the fusion fails card only U.S. unilateral action is modeled and forced negotiation taxation key to credible commitments as Meyer and Albertani and links to actually number one links to net benefit when displaced oil demand enables relevant EVs no modeling that was cross-tax fusions impossible in the near term and at least many decades away that's the 19 climate fusion energy a very reaction to companies overlap but funding the research and development difficult the fusion takes a decade later and should be companies we don't even have a basis not necessary fusion with 20 years late there always be able to really predict the commercial order after possibly now within the need for more century measure sending out with all of the breath claims of red flags over happening actually evidence support the optimism process permutation move combination and commission and HIA and implement the plan permission to the counterfeits way the plan can occur counterfeits must be off checks and function otherwise next Q advocates drills app practice and dust desirability would fit the normative checks for competition permutation to the plan through the process of the counterfeits not intrinsic because the process of the one to see a fiat delay should that's I watch 20 future users should express evidence to speak of things that is good idea
ever took an action in the future about subject to a president and verb, mechanical verb, text, and dot. Only Congress can establish a tax. Actually doesn't solve one time frame. Tipping points are non-linear, invisible. Every moment delay increase the risk, and the counterpoints delay the 12-20 across all agency EIA 6 meeting on 3 to 6 years after 4 years. So circuit of the 6 under the president, Congress, the federal sovereignty is key for every advantage. Right? The 1AC and the state's counterpoint means that any deviation from normal processes like FAA rollout freaks out businesses, looks reversal, signaling, confusing prostitute, black out legitimacy, resource deficiencies. Got Nico. That's we'll go set all 21 adequate resources with the funding director agencies, special need to the end of the show the culture trial process. It's unfixable, Constantine. Nico laws are unfixable, arbitrary, center, politicized, forward, litigation, only mandated, operates, opportunity, challenge, complexes, complex, mark the card, add complex, the internal app solves the impacts. One example, a tailored risk of climate change, no internal, reject long laundry list when A gets new answers in the block spill over when it's obviously doesn't solve the internal link and trumps NEPA. One, a model, the risk of accidental disease 0.1%, the start to the pandemic, the humanization, where it's all over the GDP, the competition with the media, 7 of the order, 1.5% order, product gas, the risk of the pandemic, next 100 years, 0.01, federalism, disad, federalism's low, this was 20 years, skinny frames, the negotiation, government, underwater references, the party, worship parties, the nation, United States federalism, and then moving into structure, production, marijuana, legalization, jurisdiction, companies, allowing people to distribute all orders, risk of government, democracy, no link, the plan is the FAA, that was the state's counterplan, it's literally not under federal authority, and the Trump card from the state's counterplan means that a crackdown on state level climate policies and never Trump thumbs this McCarthy 20-year Trump violating federal competent president of government majority block containing voting was also despite the damage of federal government's interpretive leaders of the government already covered states no spill over this Ryan 19 church world negotiating federalism of down in relation to state federal power to this zero sum model assumes the jurisdiction find about every state and federal authorities less a bright line more ongoing project negotiation and doesn't say it and the impact doesn't say it terminals to 2009 past federal crisis dump no impact the square box 22 promos have discussed with federalism is a direct source of a veto power to limited parties to use a number of veto policies states have to go by quality giving really influence politics the Saudi oil disad prices are too low for issue 23 it's coming and then 24 roughly for something that comes to see far Saudi Arabia needs solar powers more than 20 federal probably for levels 80 companies NDT companies go to the solar already Saudi Arabia hard to the process over hard vision 20 renewables are inevitable and oil price fluctuations work off and the 25 energy government technology economic future fossil would end up shipping oil plus rate of recession OPEC and Ukraine resources get hard to charge according to what possible with drop the solar battery troubles that a year with the S curve technology was exponentially S-cap a shape curve adoption solar supply energy by 2035 hydrogen nuclear space 2050 IEA unarrested race of plan goal transition is inevitable in climate change terms and disad this watch 23 Gulf embracing a shift from multiple Saudi Arabia UAE and co-developing large renewable plants that meet terms of energy uses of city ground and renewables and paper and electricity by 2030 meet 40 degree rise in temperatures exists probability levels and energy markets are tanked now let's mod for to market meltdown is going on talks in terms of the prices itself and low degree tank the double wind recession odds and 30-50% rate goes a benefits of Trump anxiety has impact on OPEC and outside members of consumer reproduction that 3 times higher than indicated that it could eliminate supply of recession weight down demand no link aviation is one sector within the transportation industry all costs like shipping vehicles power generation overall the link is tiny 90 is during 24 jet food and myself slow down and spending the global demand expectation until we hear except US and China 7% of wants to made airline workers spending so little discover the jet food will economic waste on demand and US is a fraction of Saudi's oil demand will insert a chart that's OECD 22 in Saudi clean oil production is bolstered by emissions intensity restrictions as prevalent 21 producers maintain experts for the long term on intensity compared to the Gulf Arab states the most efficient Saudi Arabia the lowest lifestyle emission even at declines to the rise of result of lower cost and emissions and the Middle East is in flames Israel's going rogue and attacking Iran and should have dumped the DA US President checks and no draw on this out 23 what is it it's been the sole square receiver order the service that America's centrally United States but economic devotion power to the limited competition is what is not to see major disruption no great power involvement especially if we move off oil let's strap and Nova 16 world leverage major power sort of Middle East company US States we go in charge of Middle East regional actors up late over the main responsible for unloaded contaminated temperature limited action and different reaching by the United States Russia and China the K framework only evaluate the desirability plan links work out uniqueness and must be based on consequences fairness debates a game means competition over determines pedagogy and fair superior exit to evaluate their content clash reading the case to short detailed specific research or writing out skills not unique their impact linked to def reps and it's inevitable from other debates and academia permutation to vote for the plan project for def reps all fails voting negatives and undo def reps if the does the permit includes their critical mediation floating takes for a better if they get for a boost case regards perfection forces debater per contest by severance and then they read a bunch of def impacts and it was worse for them because it was premeditated murder that was cross-acts which means that they knew that it was bad they decided to read it anyways and reading a death case in debate is a voting issue and the logical conclusion of all this stuff is that we should kill ourselves which is obviously bad whatever we're still thinking about how we should orient ourselves towards the world and deaf debating good maintaining this unknown and fear cause anxiety pathology and bosses ever actually deaf that probably vote fears power separation loss of control influence fear deaf they get focus on habits and fears hiding the risk of pathology focus on middle sort of so superior option control farm to have the awareness of a definite might as well how we can lead a favoring towards other one fear the market card at others and no impact the share 22 of the TMT not code trust like procedure when the result on set results and made unpublished by entirely literature to examine the strength of evidence.
Good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Reasons to reject.
Condo.
Cool. Cool.
Nenic via, you read the death guy.
Yep. Yeah, okay, second question. Advantage to, I think I'm a little bit confused about the solvency for air power. Switching off of ethanol increases military readiness, specifically.
So like, our 1AC evidence says that there are multiple different advantages in switching to SAFs. One of it is that traditional fuel releases contrails, which show up very easily on enemy radars, and SAFs produce significantly less contrails, which means that it would allow us to get into enemy territory without being detected better. Also, SAFs, the climb speed of an average aircraft increases, and our ability to go faster in the air also increases. But the second card on the advantage also talks about it would enable forward basing and reduce reliance on conventional fuel, which is vulnerable to attacks.
But this would only happen for the air sector of the military, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Sustainable aviation.
Yeah. Cool. HIA counter plan, you cut last card at Goldfuss et al. 21, correct? Resource deficiencies, got NEPA.
I cut CATS 18 to compliance is costly.
Cool, awesome. I have a question about CATS.
Sure.
Is it just making the argument that NEPA is too confusing for people to adopt, so they won't?
No, it's just that there's a laundry list of other alternative causes and problems with NEPA and the status quo
Such
that
as?
the counterplan would not resolve. So it talks about arbitrary standards, politicized enforcement, which especially under the Trump administration, protracted litigation against NEPA rulings. It talks about permitting hurdles, and also the fact that nobody actually tracks NEPA compliance, which means that the counterplan, the HIA statement would never solve.
Okay, I think I'm a little bit confused. Doesn't this just mean that the process is untrackable and that there's, in other instances, agencies have not adopted it, correct?
Well, I mean, that was one thing that I said.
They haven't adopted it because Trump told them not to do it, so there would obviously be zero spillover from the plan.
Cool, that's fine. That card's not in the context of Trump, but whatever.
He did it last week.
Hirn 24, oil DA. Think I'm a little bit confused. This is just saying that China and the US would not reduce oil demand post-plan, correct?
No, it says jet fuel makes 7% of demand.
Of oil, okay, fine.
It's like defense.
Last question, just general question about the AF. Actually, no. Ray, got anything? Cool. Process counter plan.
Okay.
Nah, it's cool. We'll take the rest.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry, crowd.
Okay, stopping. I used 4. Okay, so I have exactly 6. Sending it up. The order is going to be T, the states counter plan, the advantage counter plan, the critique, and then case in the order.
Say it again.
Yes. T, states, advantage counter plan, decay, and then case.
Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Can you download the doc? You said case at the bottom?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good.
Alright. Is anybody not ready?
Topical affirms specified in the economy-wide rejection in GHGs, including the use of technology. They didn't reject plain text in a vacuum and default to solvency and cross-text text. Only matters insofar as it determines function. Their model eliminates kind of plan ground. We define decarbonization as economy-wide, which they specifically do not meet when they see cross-text. They only apply to subsets of the aviation industry and insofar as commercial or some private, which means that they are certainly a subset of decarbonization. Extend show requires economy-wide application. Explicitly says industry, transport, buildings, ag, land use sectors, etc. must all be transformed, which means they either don't meet or link to the limits dis adverb to Cambridge definition. It doesn't even use the word decarbonization. They forgot to include it in the definition. Plus, it doesn't have intent to define in the context of the resolution broadly, so it is inapplicable. Decarbonization moves the entire system away. Mere emissions reductions is distinct. Bill 20 framework focused on emission reduction, decarbonization, better distinct from reducing emission decarbonization with the entire away from carbon energies, and energy policy must have a broad impact throughout the economy. Feller 17 energy policy is a comprehensive national energy policy, broad impact on energy, overarching national security, energy policy that affect energy policy for tangible purposes. When it focuses on this definition of regulatory actions under clean AA have impact on energy policy but are not a part of energy policy. The in definition is a non-starter. Even if they win that it has to be inside the U.S. In some capacity, that means that they have to be inside the entirety of the U.S. We'll do that below, but it refers to areas under U.S. jurisdiction. 88. The definition of United States means all places subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. In means throughout. Words and phrases date. The word in should be constructed meaning throughout. And D is a reference to a whole. Merriam-Webster no date used to indicate the reference to a whole. They said for decarbonization. If we win that decarbonization is economy-wide, then this is irrelevant. A, I don't know what A precedes in the resolution. I'll come back to this later when I remember. Market-based instruments are also economy-wide. McHenry, 09 MBIs and are designed to address market distortion. Measures are economy-wide. Scope, can you figure out what A is before? Cho and Dye, they don't understand T. Apps can mean multiple words in the resolution at the same time. They've made our argument by explaining why Cho is economy-wide. That does not violate CET. Their TEP thing is not a T definition. It is about climate policy, not energy policy. It does not have intent to define in context of the resolution. The next argument was about the like global economy stuff. The TVA below. We'll check this insofar as you can read modeling advantage. Plus, you have to be in the U.S. Limits. The counterinterpretation explodes it. There allow infinitely small tweaks in energy consumption that don't amount to decarbonization. Offsets. Offsets. Not even stopping fossil fuels, which is the only link to a net ground. That lack of other meaningful limiters in the resolution makes decarbonization a viable choke point to require that you have to make a large change to the overall energy composition in the U.S. Berkeley's case list of what they would allow is absolutely nuts. Incentivizing renewable energy, including solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, bioenergy. They can make minor alterations to consumption of any individual fossil fuel, oil, gas, coal. They can face in long-term energy policy that doesn't commit to any immediate-term reduction. Go back up to the A thing. If they are correct that A is about different types of clean energy policy, and we are correct that clean energy policy is economy-wide, that means that there are different ways to impact the economy, i.e. you can be like a carbon price or a cap and trade. Go back to limits. There's nothing that unifies the different areas under their model. It denies the scope of links that are necessary for disads like econ or changes to the fuel mix like LNG, and oil. Beaver 19, one review will not be able to answer all the difficult questions about basic and kind of possibly the challenge to the entirety of my economy across very different political and cultural settings. And incredible range of technical quadrant. There's a huge diversity of mechanisms, guys. And all 16 energy is broadly includes diverse social, technical, economic analysis, including the whole life cycle research, and include all energy, including generation, distribution, innovation, price action, marketing, investment, regulation, compliance, and behavior, consumption. Expanding the scope to the resolution undermines the quality of preparation, overstretches the neg, incentivizes the rush toward topic generics designed to clash with everything, which is an impact turn to functional limits. Our interpretation solves and it forces us to clash over the center controversy of clean energy policy through decarbonization. Anything else undermines research incentives, the quality of clash and fairness, the TVA, do a carbon tax economy-wide fiat that those rebates go to greening aviation, which solves their ground while also maintaining limits. They said flex, over-limiting is better than under the race of the margin under their model, incentivized evaporates predictable limits. Even if you think we might bracket out some ground, neg grounds outweighs, they get first, last, infinite prep can preempt, then write apps designed to be core generics. You may think our model crowds out RAFs, that's wrong. There's an infinite combination, prices, caps, tradable permits, BCAs, non-BCAs, process ground like EPA that all provide pruntable AF ground and preserve limits for the egg. They just have to be economy-wide, which all of the things I just said could be functional limits. Don't check, we've impact turn it above, but the infinitely aggressive nature of their model means AF spike core links explained above because they can preempt. Frame this through models. They limited the floor of the resolution, being neg untenable. They said picks, we're straight turning it. Everything that they think is an objectionable, they make a topical ask. Ask can be pick on minor risk of a solvency deficit because you have your 1AC, but the neg has no skin in the game. If we can't get links to core topic offense independently, they're good anyways. They test the necessity of the plan. You should be prepared to defend them, and they're key to deep energy debates, Branson. 7. How to make debate more technical possible, opening up to based on topic where e-commerce with echoes of dimension taking screen with the true receiving frameworks upstream, downstream, can narrow the debate, focus on the real and the real depth discussion, narrow debates that generate real sustainable expertise, reasonability, default to competing interpretations, and offense, defense. We have found massive limits to that, which inherently proves that they are reasonable, especially given the model and subsequent weights of the margin explained above. Reasonability calls arbitrary and regressive judge intervention. It does not crowd out substance. T doesn't crowd out substance, leads to fruitful and legal economic debates about intricacies of energy policy. At worst, the combination of all reasonable interpretations creates an untenable interpretation of topic that proves our limits. The states kind of plan permutation. You can see the permutation. We asked them what things were voted in the cross-sex. They didn't say 50 state fiat. Oops. First, the next counter plan, permutation. The conditionality is good. 1, education. It forces both sides. Sorry, I'm waiting for you. It forces both sides to do more research and process information at a faster rate for the only skills that are relevant outside of the debate. 2, logic, no rational decision maker would vote on something worse than the scope. 3, neg flex is key to avoiding strategic tax and testing the out from multiple angles. 4, ideological flex, debating in different frameworks is good and prepares for multiple levels of truth testing. 5, side bias, done on T. 6, counterinterpretation. We get what we did, debating in different frameworks is good. 7, actually not going to read that one. They said distro has no definitions, causing pointless theoretical objections. The def K, concede the perm, it's just a test of competition. Reading the K in and of itself is not a voter. Conditionality checks it disproves the AF plus the K itself doesn't make any claims about what we should do, rather what we shouldn't do. This is a non-starter for them. We're going to concede their framework that only consequences matter, which means you cannot weigh this epistemology offense against them. If you think I'm wrong about this, T outweighs because it's a crown of the round happening case. Warming doesn't cause extinction, it's thumbed extended thorstat. We've seen 10 degrees in 20 years before we had walls. Humans survived that. We adapt through to cooperation and forewarning, which is the intervening actors. They said no, they said no, that's incorrect. Other countries are taking action. EU has a CBAM, China and Russia are considering taxation. They're transitioning now. That will be the uniqueness claim at the top of the 1NR. Also, our models are better than theirs. They don't account for ozone depletion and aerosol increases. That prove that natural explanations for their things mean that they can't solve. The thorstat assumes the terminal non-gradual is not an answer because deaths are declining relative to essential. Ozone is not as a non-starter. Also, the NASA model showed recovery by 2066 due to declines in CFC. AF is not an alt cause. The evidence declines that CFCs are decreasing in the SWO, which means we solve their internal ocean acidification answered above insofar as warming is slow and thumped the ICAO is just a safety organization. The travel management, they don't have any enforcement mechanisms. They said space travel management, that's our argument. It's just about safety regs. ICAO 25 mission to serve the global states of international national ICAO develop policies and case compliant ops forms of the analysis by assistance bills, aviation has many other activities in the cooperation of the member states and the stakeholders, space debris. It takes forever for them to get to it, and adaptation solves. Mega 19, Kessler's time scale that intend slow motion disasters, but I have levels access to it. It's becoming practical if that means how long to robots we take the risking flies out as we need to. We're not destroy LEO, not going to read that next card, but they extend the font. It's combined with a low LEO. Kessler's overhyped in the scope. Space is so huge that there's no collisions or breeze. It concludes 1 in 10,000. Probability starts neg, and collisions don't cause the orbit because they're hard-hitting now. Yes, intervening actors, squo solve. Score being 16, cascade is not accurate. It's launch space have hard weights and negate the risks of bubble shields. We have a tracking system in gravity. The space happens very quickly. That's so great. Occurs gradually. Kessler occurs so gradually. We now understood that we already take steps to limit debris. New space gravity lights and life plans are also plans to clear orbits. When we can manage the comms, it's a longulus impact. You should reject it. Also, cross-apply all of the arguments about space freeze. They can't get to this war or comms impact unless they win space freeze. So you know the squo solves it. The food advantage supply is food supply is decentralized and resilient. That's a consultancy evidence. It assumes the U.S., which was their answer, and it's getting better. That is Berzo 19. Contrary to news, the environment is getting better than more than 35 years ago. There's more straightforward tech, including agricultural resources to hydroponics be able to go. Food supply wealth is the only driver as countries measure the benefit of the environment. The EKC has been conferred by a great deal of research. Biodiversity will the turn drop down to readiness. There's no geopolitical region that is in danger. Revisionist powers have no incentive to engage in aggression. Territories unrelated to wealth. Independence shacks at worst. It's probably misperception. So cowards are scared regardless, and there's no correlation. Konkin, Genos 18, services were forced to cut faulty maintenance. International exercise and training to physical and assessing readiness to lack of data. It's difficult to undermine direct coordination between states and readiness instance. Go back up to the first advantage. I forgot to say all causes to things like CO, NOx, and SO2 from not the aviation industry, which means when they only decarbonize aviation, they can't solve their advantage. I'm good.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about your T interpretation.
That's
So affirmatives that would meet this are what? A carbon tax, cap and trade, ACAs. Is there any other affirmatives that you think would meet this definition?
I mean, anything that is economy-wide would probably meet that.
Okay, so other than the ones that I've listed, what affirmatives?
Sure, deposit and refund.
Deposit and refund.
Cap and
How
tax.
does that mean economy-wide?
What do you mean? You can apply a deposit and refund to the whole economy. I don't know what
Okay,
you're
so
talking about.
I guess my question is, so carbon taxation. After carbon taxation, there would still be some oil deposits that are profitable because the production processes they can do it at a low cost.
Yeah, but it applies.
I'm confused why your definition of decarbonization does not mix burdens. Like it implies that the affirmative has to completely eliminate fossil fuel usage. Why does a carbon tax meet that?
I disagree that it says that we have to completely eliminate fossil fuels. It says that we have to remove away from all fossil energy throughout the U.S. It does not say we have to totally eliminate them.
Wait, so why does the affirmative then not meet that?
Because you only move away in the aviation sector.
SAF industry, which displaces demand.
No, you only apply to the aviation sector that was 1AC cross-sex.
Sorry, I'm confused. Draw this distinction. Earlier you said that the affirmative has to just displace fossil fuels
No.
across the entire economy to meet your interpretation. The AF would displace fossil fuels across the entire economy by building up SAFs. How do we not meet this?
If you're gonna
and
go
if we
for
don't
like-
meet it, then why doesn't this, why
If
isn't
you're gonna
this
go for
mixed
like
up?
we're effectually topical, that's not a reason that you should win the round. But we're making the argument that
What
we
AF
have to
isn't
do the
affects
entire
topical? What AF isn't affects topical?
an app that applies to the whole economy. What are you talking about?
Okay. So the case page, advantage one, how does adaptation resolve the existential effects of warming? Like, walk me through that process. Like, the Earth is getting hotter and we have a seawall. Why does that stop extinction?
Well, we think that, sure, seawall's a great example. It would stop things like flooding, trashing infrastructure.
When do we make a
ag,
flooding
less
impact?
productive.
When do we say flooding causes extinction?
What?
Like, what impacts that we have read? do
There
you
are
think
other,
seawalls-
yes, there are other types of adaptation. We have not only said seawalls.
Okay, so walk me
Things
through the
like
process of
green
all
tech
this.
being involved, introduced in the status quo, cooperation between governments, models show forewarning to climate change, means that scientists are already tuned in. It's the reason that we've already looked into solving the ozone hole.
Wait, I have no clue why you started talking about that ozone. I want you to apply your adaptation argument to the terminals that I extended in the 2AC. So how does adaptation solve disease? Let's start there.
Sure, things like forewarning, we understand where
Forewarning.
disease is going to spread, what the vectors of disease come from, and tech can combat.
And the card that
make
you
vaccines
think
quicker.
says that is successful, that you will give the judges is,
It makes sense. I'm in the wrong folder.
You're taking a couple seconds.
Did y'all say we're taking a breath?
Yeah, we're taking a couple seconds.
Oh, cool, perfect.
Maybe.
Do a sentence in her. Yours HIA counterclaim. The federalism PA. Saudi oil PA.
What was after HIA? Federalism?
Yeah, federalism and Saudi oil.
Haven't got it.
Let's see if I click the send button. I did not. I thought I did.
I was gonna say.
It's always something like that.
So the order again?
HIA, federalism, Saudi oil.
Wait, sorry, we'll take a whole section. Did you read the Van Strike card in the one?
No, I didn't even know what you're asking me.
Did you
Where
read
is it in
the
the?
very bottom of the box, the last one?
No, I did not turn that.
Are you all good?
Yeah.
Still running. Okay, I didn't know. Awesome. I'm gonna start then.
Oh wait, sorry, I.
Oh. Cool. I'm gonna start if I don't get interrupted. First on HIA, concede on the permits that tested competition and neg fiat. We did. They never asked. We never defended. They should ask in cross text. If you don't buy, conduct justifies any negative use, and T certainly outweighs on federalism. Concede, Trump thumps, and no impact to the DA. Both improved defense and there's no offensive flow, so I don't have to spend any more time here. But Saudi oil crash quickly goes existential. The want to see it develops into World War III as Russia and China get drawn and goes nuclear and general war, destroys civilization, means none of their U.S. U.S. draw and defense supplies outweighs magnitude. First destroy civilization as clouds of smoke over the world of famine spread globally. The ozone is between seconds time frame filtered the speed of link here. Says that lose diversification, generate insecurity, boost conflicts, melt on classes, the social construct of loyalty, and that turns case Myers 22. Diesel fueled military operations followed the consequences of climate. Even worse, this society tried to rebuild and undertake fossil fuel power, restructure fossil fuel reserves, the easiest source to relocate renewables required allocation of energy, complicated network solves climate change as a luxury of the planet at space, and Vision 2030 alone solves case. I'm going to do more. I'm going to read a few more cards on this, but the one to see cards hyper specific about how to adopt, allowing Saudi to fully fund Vision 2030 not only allows them to fully adopt renewable infrastructure in the entire Middle East, but allows them to spill up globally. Other countries would trade in absent oil. It would go to the aviation sector and certainly solves case by 2030 because the status quo is the kind of plan that solves warring energy independence, but low prices eliminate demand for clean tech. Wayne 23. 30 economies cost like control oil prices, CCMT, decrease oil prices, give positive driving green innovation, increasing oil prices, increase renewable infrastructure, reducing energy and commodity, raising R&D and energy, to the effects notable for importers, high income, developed economies to achieve emission reduction at higher, quicker pace of oil prices, distributed to the climate order of favorable subsidies in its order. I'm going to skip that card, but the one card they've read on this question is outdated and concludes that in 2025 it will be better. Purple 2AC counted in 924. The GCC outlook for 2025 is bright. Saudi economy is expected to expand 4.5% in 2025. Virginia is continue to seeking a modest inflation rate. Arabia is explicit inflation rate of 2.1% this year. And here's a more recent one. Global prices make Vision 2030 unfundable. Lincoln 206 of Vision 2030 decline purchase commensurate critical phase implementation and economic policies remain flexible at adaptation developments, particularly regarding oil production and lower prices for repercussions for revenues and remain a cornerstone of Vision 23 funding. And I'm going to do more line by line. First, the background evidence. It's wrong. Inevitable translation doesn't trigger the link, but sudden demand shocks due back in 24. Declining revenues translation different from positive affected. Now the price of supply chains are just similar rate of demand. It is likely to be through the volume of price fluctuation. Temporary petrostates expect revenue to rebound. Slowing demand is a gradual. Petrostates can anticipate finding its prediction to petrostates during the transition. Petrostates able to positively adapt. And I'm not going to read that next card, but the Ukraine warrant in this card is wrong because that was in the EU. They don't import from other countries, and even if then it's about the airline industry. I.e., the EU still uses oil for aviation and still most certainly gets it from Saudi Arabia. They've written no uniqueness on this question, so you don't take it as a thumper. On the they didn't actually read a card on climate thumps, just tagged it that way, but it's wrong. First, adaptation. GCC countries will insulate themselves from price volatility, but can only do so with the oil revenue. Henderson 23. Global states either have hydrocarbon revenue and economic power means that they have more capacity to manage a warming climate and the Gulf countries heavily invested heavily in infrastructure that can afford food and then ensuring diversification economies also establish food processing in the States again. Regulated that a lot of food indoors thereby power reduces exposure to use oil finance and its way to example the way the states dependent on oil states invested in established in food stores that Saudi and Qatar and UAE and completed water shortage will guarantee supply offer resilience in the face of climate crisis. And I'm not going to do the next card, but I'm going to move on to uniqueness. The card that they read is just about tariffs and energy market broadly. Doesn't assume that Trump loves oil and he exempts tariffs on oil countries to ensure that he gets it. And the effect is muted anyways. WSG 2-3. Trump tariffs expected to have limited impact on oil and the price in the near term. The levies are temporary and seaborne exports find alternative markets and oil prices spiking. Reduced 328 oil prices said for the third week of the game. The main driver's been oil sanctions and do 25% tariffs to combat uncertainty. Venezuela oil to China stall India. It will halt oil brand imports potential loss and the potential to see imposed on Iran to cause a tightness in supply. The signs of demand in the U.S. forecast of Brent to average at 76 in 2025. I'm moving on to the link. There's three framing questions. First, the link alone turns place concludes that the threat of energy changes is causing market flooding, making more emissions in the search trend. They didn't answer the trend and asked this more. Don't give it in the 1AR. Second, is perception of the plan is enough to trigger the impact. I.e., pay attention to this part because it's important and dropped. Even if it doesn't crash the Saudi economy, they will perceive it as potentially deteriorating to future oil revenues. They will use their leadership in OPEC to control oil prices, which ensures collapse. 3 is the link shapes direction to gain evidence concludes that perception of energy transition causes market flooding that taints prices and aggregate rent losses. On the no link, the extent IATTA 24 proves that an airline switching to SAFA is bad. They no longer use oil and it's important from Saudi, which lowers prices. Uniquely impacts Saudi because the Middle East exporters requires sustained rental policies, pose threats to exporters by curtailing demand, sustaining budgets. All cost of stuff is wrong. Once they read a card, we'll read one. I'm actually doing that now. All costs is wrong. Main sectors: aviation, OPEC 15, which is second important sectors, global oil demand, transportation industry, main components include aviation, followed by aviation representing 6% of total demand. And Darren is misread. Yes, it's only 7%, but that is certainly bad because it's 4.5 million barrels a day. So under 13, aviation plays a significant role in growing source of oil demand, responsible for 10% of global transportation oil use 4.5 million barrels a day. And even then, Saudi relies on aviation, but it's driving demand. But SAFA kills the averaging 23. The aviation sector expected to drive oil demand in the near future, increase in jet fuel production to double 2025. SAF accounted for less than 0.1% of fuel. And we can see if they win modeling, that means that all countries they listed would decarbonize and move off of oil in the airline industry, which ensures the link and on the impacts that they're wrong about drawing. Their defense assumes the U.S. goes in first, but the impact of which we've read in the 1AC is hyper-specific to Russia and China getting involved in the Middle East first, which causes U.S. draw, and even then it still escalates to nuclear war between Middle East states, means none of their U.S. stuff applies, and U.S. security stuff, it doesn't work easy. Not reading that next part, but Saudi unrest triggers regional collapse and draws in the U.S. London. The 22 are revolted over economic issues with drawn countries, the debility civil war, the uprising spawned by economic countries, China, conservative religious element, regime is likely to compel Iran exported insurgency regime and intended revolution by drawing the U.S. into another Eastern conflict. And Gulf state fracture in great powers roads 23 factors that draw an external powers regime and faulted regimes fracture power perceived opportunities to increase their influence their external involvement. Got that external involvement.
Start. Okay. Order is advantage 1, advantage 2, T, the dissect. Good with it.
I'm just voting here. I'm good.
Climate change causes extinction that sprout. One system collapse unlocks every existential risk, resource shortages, food collapse, disease, nuclear war, tech development, health risk, or unmodeled. 2, defense. Doesn't assume carbon source and irreversible tipping point. Scientists go modern society didn't exist in 10 degrees. Adaptation is impossible. School proofs. Trump obviously makes it impossible. That's their defense that they conceded. Models wrong. Aren't scientific and don't account for feedback. Feedback that sprat intervention is wrong. Card 0 says it's sufficient to solve now. Ozone causes extinction. Airplanes are unique because emissions are released in high elevation. Unlocks deadly EV rays which kills all life. And that says about one hole. Broadly, ozone is in decline. Ocean acidification was drawn, not slow. Immediately kills all phytoplankton in the ocean, which destroys water and kills all life on Earth. It's external from warming, and they have no defense. That's crib. Yes, ICAO's key drop spillover. Chicago Convention is what is the basis for to space. Travel management is our argument. Satellites have to travel through air in order to get to space, which means it's the only form that can solve it. Only defense of space was Kessler. RF says one satellite is sufficient. Sat loss leads to miscount. Proceed as preemptive strikes and removes ability to detect nukes. That's Beauchamp. Aviation is key. 1, cirrus clouds and contrails drop more radiative than CO2 do. Drop only sector that 1 T-carb, only barrier to 2 degrees. 3, exponential increase in the next 20 years. Card 0 says aviation emissions are low. So only we have evidence on the question. Advantage 2, conceded inevitable EV demand collapse of the industry. Past numbers weren't complete. Farmland collapse after key for else. Otherwise, billions are sucked out of rural farming states. That's Rosen. U.S. exports are key. Dropped in a period precedes conflict. Brazil doesn't assume ethanol plus air power dropped. SAF's key for expanded power protection turns. The DISAT drop decline. Causes how every house went to escalate. That's Berkeley budget turns. Solves everything. So it's a counterplan that solves the DISAT. T. Plant text in a vacuum, extended 0 other way to conceptualize T violation, so only plant text in a vacuum, AVL justifies pseudo competition, which nukes the affirmative. Their interp obviously mixes burdens because you have no idea how someone decarbonizes without solvency, which makes it impossible to meet. At the top, they dropped the definition for 4. It means intended to further. Every other definition is irrelevant because even if decarb is economy-wide, the plan furthers that. Vote half on jurisdiction. And so we meet argument. Decarbonization is a process that's Cambridge. Yes, defines in resolution context, plain meaning outweighs because it's what the courts use. Drop 3 highlight of Cho. It's about industries and would allow forest apps, which removes limits. Mitigate says decarb is a framework to move away. The app meets it. Fowler doesn't define CEP, which inherently is a subset of energy. Decarbonization is just have to reduce CO2 emissions. 20 we use decarbonization to reduce the emissions, not to remove carbon. It can be sector specific. Term decarbonization means set away by a sector medium as a carbon footprint. MBIs 2 ACES 16 basically be limited systemic better across region. So limitations in sector or medium. They say limits, no offsets or incentives. Apps MBIs check because it must be a tax minor alterations. Wrong functional limits check in. 1 literature. Some of the advocates advantages are terrible. So smart 2 and 0 case. Fed key barely exists. In other words, check 2 generics. Market scale politics, oil, econ states. Advantage trends are interforced to creatively apply them to new arcs, which unlock critical thinking, which is their terminal vibrates about every AFCOX. Doesn't assume MBI is a limit, otherwise limits explosion is inevitable, so only our offense predictably outweighs 1 logic. Clash determine when reading of the rest of the most predictable turns. Clash narrow limit is useless if we cannot anticipate it, especially at the NDT, because new apps are inevitable, and only the lit can grab crap 2. Arbitrariness and negative can always craft a more limiting interim. And afflux outweighs 1 research, such as create strategic angles versus core generics. 2 fairness over limiting atrophies, negative rates, negatives. Find the best 2 in ours picks and impact turns, hosing the affirmative deviation from 50 is not valid. 3 internal term. Their offense and innovation is based off of new apps. 4 NDT afflux is key. Negatives are stacked over the seasons of the private new process is overpowered by the deficits it derived from subsets. Their term is only 2 apps. That's far worse. Form debate across this ground blows. Name a single advantage right on this year. Generic answers asked. Generics answers asked. Learning to apply those is good. That was above picks. It's impossible. Can't be because internal net benefit will always outweigh any marginal solvency deficit. It means every app loses, even if good in the lit. Being at the NDT nukes the ability to be the affirmative, which obviously outweighs reasonability, filters the margins of their offense. But being negative is impossible. Otherwise, crowds out substance encourages theory turns our offense. It's not the sum of all reasonable. Just our interpretation. Judge invention is inevitable and no link because it relies on cost benefit analysis. The oil descent. No draw in, pass crashes obviously thumb, no turns, case card is vague, can't solve aviation, which I did on case 2030. Price is low, doesn't assume the plan, quote solves it is wrong, that's case money. Re-highlighting doesn't assume new tariffs, Lincoln is vague, and doesn't assume the affirmative. 2030 is impossible, prices are too low now, Sonny. Let's get hardest and currently overthrowing 2030, that's Kamani. It speaks to the evidence that they're not doing 2030 anymore, and they have no evidence that they are structural causes. Destroy transition. 1. Renewable fluctuations make it inherently risky if it's priced in the app. Is a drop in the bucket, that's buying half per draw. 2. Gulf transition. Already shifting prices are key. If they are tariffs, ruin them, that's wash in mod. Blankenshire doesn't assume Trump. Numbers scare rates audio away from oil supply glut. 24 oil glut with visibility, make prices peak oil 2029. So with 10 million barrels, midday EV take over cars energy supply study over shift demand 5 by next year. Stumpers, Johnny, Nvidia 19 oil prices. Episodic high voltage since 80, 2014 $59 drop. This should be still Chinese oil shale oil prices. Her production inputs under low price volatility system volatility induced by slowdown global growth Chinese downturn in industrial sector shale. Revolution to tracing oil prices to reduce GDP by 200 billion to be back supplies. Need to be $80 by barrel. A peak demand in 2025. 24 yield in North America to oil consumption allowed again in 2019 level users already seen demand plateau. 2025 adaptation answered above impossible. No uniqueness assumes the most recent tariffs. Cars from 2 months ago will not cut it. Price free fall now. Up for the gas oil. New price on the change will do about economy demand. S&P. Economic confidence price on the reduction. Crude oil prices are shockingly low. For the open crude rates output demand like will be opportunity to accelerate competition against the backwards round by tariffs. It's over. For 2 price dropped after tariffs. More demand liberation day could overturn global trade. Old demand policy stroke inflation. Slow growth intensified trade disputes and inventory growth. Their cars are at old tariffs, not new ones. Oil's nukes. Fuel for 2 plus. Just slow market just tariffs and estimate around the market fuel uncertainty. Activity loss ground reversing grains. Jet fuel. The link makes 0 cents. Card 0 cents. Aviation is key. It's one sector. And consumption plummeted during COVID because of tariffs. It's 7% of global demand. That's deranged. Demand is low now. 24. Demand consumption really below beginning 20 aviation not fully re-entered 2020. Jet fuel is consumed 95 remaining below. Let's say to be by foreign commercial carrier. Activity improved since each stranded assets. Wrong link defense. No incentive to sell off because fiat is instant in their card is about perception of energy policy. The link OPEC gives all causes on surety. It says transportation in other sectors, petrochemicals, residential, commercial, ag, barrel count irrelevant, drop in the bucket, which is wrong because their argument is that Saudi transition before the aviation sector can scale up. Impact, use it or lose it, wrong, no incentive for last year. No petro state has nukes, no EV even comes close, no collapse. Clean 99 Saudi never made considerable progress in endeavors to recent revenue resources through that. The oil revenue cuts 40% downward moves in oil prices would have a negative impact less than a decade ago. No one has incentive to use nuke match checks, everyone, and no Russia draw, and that was in the 2 we see no great power involvement. 7 to 16 roll under major power station, ultimately Middle East decline, US become tired of the Middle East regional actors, outplay external, responsible to limited containment damage, limitation action, representing the US and China, and it's trending downward, plus any 24 goods have been moderate demand forecast to be small against and fuel efficient demand, more than just lower than 2019 trends, continue structure gradually easing demand market share, EVs improvement in vehicle fuel, supply rate, reduce oil and power generation overall peaking demand by decade.
Much 6. 6.
You read?
Yeah.
Orders received. You being not ready?
Yeah, no, give me like 1 second.
Sorry, what started?
T.
Yep.
Even if you think the 1AR is ahead on the effectual and also knew we need, they have dropped definitions out of the block to win a T debate. I understand from your faces that you do not like this interpretation, but we are fucking cranking them on a topical app. Must defend an economy-wide reduction in GHGs. They didn't want to see cross-text was clear. They only apply to commercial aviation, reject plain text in a vacuum. They've dropped that text only matters insofar as it determines function, which means their model eliminates net ground. We've defined words as economy-wide, but they specifically do not meet, so this is a non-starter. Our interpretation does not mix burdens. It's about economy-wide application, but I'll explain the difference on the decarbonization definition proper. The for definition was not dropped. I said if for is intended to further decarbonization, and decarbonization is economy-wide, then they have to intended economy-wide, not just aviation. If you think that they're correct about this, then this is recognize that this is a new application of this argument and a new effects argument. Reject the team for deterrence. That's a voter for fairness in class because it destroys predictable limits, allowing them to take any step outside of the revolution to eventually get to decarbonization policy. Open up the floodgates to literally take any 50 steps to be topical. We couldn't predict any of them. Improves our limits violation as it makes all process counterplans and picks a topical. Extend our interpretation. A few words we've defined they specifically do not meet. 1. Decarbonization. Both the 1NC and 2NC evidence prove it requires economy-wide applications of moving away from fossil fuels. Our argument is not that the plan must immediately end all fossil fuels. Rather, must immediately change standards to all fossil fuels or apply something to all fossil fuels, which means which they specifically do not meet. It says that it changes all aspects of the economy. That doesn't obviate limits. It doesn't merely say we need forest acts. Rather, the plan must apply to all areas, which is our application, i.e. ag, forest, industry, etc., which is our argument about how it has to change all industry industries, not end all industries. Second, the definition of energy policy. The federal evidence says comprehensive national planning has intent to define and says that policies that affect energy policy are for limited focus, do not fit within the definition, which it presupposes their definition in the 1AR. Star in the U.S., they dropped this. The 2NC evidence indicates that it is throughout the U.S. that decarbonization must apply. That means even if you think they're winning literally every single other part of the T debate, they dropped a definition that we do not meet, so it is game over. That means our definition says that in the U.S. refers to jurisdiction under the United States. It means throughout, and so that's the words and phrases, and D is a reference to the whole. That means that decarbonization or clean energy policies, whatever you think that they mean, have to apply to the entirety of the U.S. and not just the aviation sector, so they certainly explode limits. The MBI definition, it's designed to apply to the entirety of the economy, not just single actors. That's the McHenry evidence. Their evidence has no intent to define or exclude, but ours does. Specifically, go down to limits. The counter-interpretation explodes it, and no other words can check it. Their interpretation allows infinitely small tweaks to consumption that don't amount to meaningful decarbonization. The lack of other meaningful limiters in the resolution makes decarbonization a vital choke point to require the AF to make a large change to the overall energy composition. They've dropped their case list of what they allow. Individual renewables, solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, bioenergy. Make minor alterations to consumption of any individual fossil fuels like oil, gas, or coal. They could phase in a long-term energy policy that doesn't commit to any immediate-term action, which meets their effectual definition of topicality. The generics don't check our ground. They have nothing to unify areas under their model, except the MBIs and the climate policy spend the entirety of the economy through different settings and technical problems. Our Cox evidence says their interpretation justifies things like generation, distribution, innovation, price, tax, market creation, all at specific subsets of industry, which creates a permutation of AF that explodes limits, expanding the scope of the resolution, overstretches neg ground, makes topic generics unwinnable, and impact turns functional limits. Our interpretation solves because it forces us to clash over the central policy of clean energy policy for decarbonization. Anything else undermines research incentives. Limits not inevitable. There are arguments about being the NDT is our warrant if they're right that new AF's inevitable. T is the only thing to check. Also, they dropped the TVA that says economy-wide carbon tax and fiat rebates go to greening aviation, which means our model solves their education offense. The standards debate. First, functional limits don't check. Infinite regressive nature of their model means AFs easily spike and skirts core neg links and core advantage counterplaying ground become AFs. Remember the effectually topical thing I explained. They rate their AFs to preempt and beat our core offense. The drop that Trump takes all disads, which means that their generics are non-starter. It also evaporates states. And in this round, perception and link defense on oil proves that we don't get the link when they're in topical. Frame this through models. There's limits. The floor of the resolution enables the scope of the AF at being the point is such inevitable. They can't weigh predictability because they drop the rates to the margins under their model, which means that it is a non-starter for them. New AF's inevitable as the NDT is a reason that we need topicality. They said neg can read 1% more limiting default offense. Defense will be below unreasonability, but neg flex outweighs. They have no warrant, but they drop first, last, infinite prep, and right has to be generics means they decide the basis of discussion, and that makes generics a non-starter, so we have to have decarbonization to check it. We don't limit AF out. They drop that. We have things like prices, caps, tradable permits, BCAs, non-BCAs, cap and tax, process, advantage ground, all provide plenty of AF ground, but preserve predictable limits for the ground. The picks are not impossible. They turn. First of all, they drop the straight turn that they make everything that they think is bad top on, but they make everything they think is objectionable a topical app. So this is a non-starter for them, but they're key to deep energy debates because the Brenson evidence says they narrow the depth of discussion. Plus, they test the intensity of the strain, so solvency deficit outweighs. Lastly, reasonability. Judge intervention is not inevitable. At least it's a sliding scale, but a massive limit set proves they're not reasonable. But default to competing interpretations in offense, defense, because anything else causes arbitrary intervention, and the worst combination of reasonable interpretations gives an untenable version of the topic.
Who do you have, Berkeley?
749.
Thank you. Start getting it right.
Yeah, I'll do that.
cards, by the way.
Good.
You should think
long and hard about what their model of debate looks like at the end of the day. We cut 2 halves in the preseason and that's it. It is trophies the value of the activity, and by the NDT, every position put in the 1 and C becomes a viable 2 and R. Beating the half looks like shoot the fish in a barrel. Negative win rates explode. And the MBI topic turns into the carbon tax topic. The 2 and R mishandled our definition of war again. Even if decarbonization means economy-wide, 4 means intending to furthering that economy-wide decarbonization can look like subsets and sector-specific mandates, but that eventually allows for broader decarbonization. There's a couple reasons why you should prefer our counter-interpretation. First, it's the only definition read in the debate, so you know that it is the most predictable, and the only words they had against predictability was, quote, race to the margins. But second, resolutional content, the words before decarbonization change how the word should be defined. Taking the words out of their context leads to arbitrary definitions that skew debates, which should be under the predictability debate. But third, it's not affects T, but their interpretation is, because winning economy-wide relies on a solvency argument to beat the topicality argument. But even if they drop the Cambridge, King, and Steinfeld evidence, all that indicate that decarbonization should be understood as a process to reduce carbon emissions. They drop the prototype. Cambridge cites plain meaning of the word, which is the most predictable standard for debate research, because you can always find a court case or article defining a word in other contexts, which means you should assume their interpretation causes a race to the bottom, which causes substance crowd out and internally turns all other education offense. But there's a top level frame for the sort of rant that 2 and R gives about the definitions at the top of the 2 and R. But first, decarbonization. Drop the re-highlighting of Joe. It's about ag, forest, and specific industries, which obviously starts at 0. How does the carbon tax forest? That obviously effectively changes aspects of the economy, which proves their interpretation inevitably links to the effects G offense. But second is energy policy. Drop. Those are not the words in the resolution. We read a specific 2EC piece of evidence in the context of clean energy policies, and their Fowler evidence is in the context of energy policies, which obviously clean modifies the resolutional statement. Third, in the U.S., drop that it's irrelevant because our AF applies throughout the entire U.S. jurisdiction. It was in the 1AR. Otherwise, no AF meets because there are countless, there are counties with only renewables, and a carbon tax wouldn't change those places, or it wouldn't, displace a low-cost oil production. Yes, all of our evidence has both intent to define and exclude. That was all above. But even if they win all these definitions, none of it matters because it's a counter-interpretation. So if we win that subsets are bad, then this sort of all goes away. The limits explosion stuff, I'll do the debate. Actually, no, precision. I'll do the debate here. Omitting resolution wordings for the sake of debatability is not a sustainable model of debate. The 2 and R is super light on predictability, so you should not do the work for them. Precision outweighs. 1, in the internally terms of education, the only way to unlock clash is through what reading the resolution is most likely to be predictable for the NDT. That matters because it's the nexus point for preparation that determines negative research. Is foundationally illogical to weigh debatability because it means our interpretation is the combination of all unpredictable limits which internally terms of IT exist to protect, especially at the NDT, which they drop because new apps were inevitable, and only literature can guide prep, so you should start prepping sooner than later to solve all your offense. Second turns the race to the margins offense. Negatives teams can always limit their interpretation one less out. They draw that causes substance crowd, which are trophies the IT exists to protect. I'm not going to do a lot of work here because that is functionally conceded. The argument on small consumption, Our definitions are definitely much more predictable. The 4 definition is a definition from the Supreme Court, and they also dropped there are 3 cards in the Cambridge Prototype about plain meaning. The functional limits debate serves up all the rest of their offense because it means that there's a high risk of precision offense, which means we only need some sort of defense versus their limits. Now, functional limits is terminal G to everything. Their argument on small consumption does not matter. They have a specific oil DA to SAFs and perception links. Obviously, solve this up. The case left stuff does not matter because they conceded the other words in the resolution checks this. And subsidies out are deleted by TMBI. But even if states contemplate is busted, has identical legal jurisdiction over environmental regulations, falls on arguments and internals, researching Fed key angles, solves our offense. DAs are the best in decades. Variations of the oil DA, politics DA, the grid DA, and econ DA are all perfected by Trump. Counterplanes, Nexit, imminent chondro process, intercept have to be intrinsic or lose to advantage counterplane subsidies, or tax counterplanes itself. Every single affirmative case like CAP or LPA linked to every MBI. In other words, in the resolution, like I did above, check AF flexibility. Also, there's a limited amount of solvency advocates that exist on the internet, which obviously soaks everything up. And if they're right that affirmatives will race to design strategic affirmatives to check back against generics, then they can just research the in-depth, they can get in-depth on those generics and predict where affirmatives will try and link turn their offense. But even if AF flexibility, you should be very comfortable pulling the trigger on it. AF always a small risk because even if they require a little more negative research or interpretation, which are just to a handful of AFs for the entire season, which turns their offense, research subsets, or keep for new angles versus core generic specific internal lead chains, and smart negative innovation. This turns and outweighs their offense because knowing sectors is good. good in refining gradual understandings of the topic is a feature of the activity, not a bug, because it forces people to think on their feet, research tricky aspects, which is good, iterative practice that produces the only appropriate skill of the activity. But fairness, they conceded that over-limiting a trophy's negative win rates by the end of the season, every single one is in position is a viable 2-and-R. Every single 2A is just getting headshot out the block. Teams will rush to the Martians, proliferate new picks, unpredictable competition angles, and which destroys the bait. They say that the NDT new apps are inevitable, but the fact is inevitable means you should drop their interpretation because it forces you to start cutting stuff early. The TVA stuff, zero clue what this gets them. This is not a KF. We're going to counter interpretation. None of this matters. The Trump stuff, it's also bad for the affirmative because we're literally climate 2A under the topic, which is bad. But they say that you don't get the link whenever you're on topical, but you read specific essays about it. Did that above predictability? Did that above Netflix outweighs? Does not matter. Did that above because they dropped it. Over limiting a trophy's AF win rates, picks worse, giving it to the neck. All the Affleck's offense indicates that tons of positions you could go for, and all the functional limits of his defense. So this reasonability was a joke. Judge intervention can see that it's inevitable, but it requires you to do cost-benefit analysis, which assumes all of their offense. And they also conceded a substance crowd out on reasonability, which means that if we're going to high risk of defense, you should just pull the trigger affirmative because their motto was to make internal link towards education that they want to protect. Here we go. Debate.
When we get the recording, do you want us to send it to you?
Yeah.